Well, rather unexpectedly today, I found myself in the lovely spa town of Leamington, Royal Leamington Spa, to give it its proper name. It lies right in the middle of Warwickshire, a county in the very centre of England, Shakespeare's county. Stratford-on-Avon is only actually a few miles from here. But Leamington is a very different place to Stratford. Stratford's full of all its oldie worldy charm and half-timbered houses and thatch in the nearby villages. Leamington's a bit of a newbie. It really only came into its own in the 18th and early 19th centuries when spa water, mineral water, was discovered near here. The time there was a great fashion among the British, like the rest of Europe, for people to take the waters for their health, and anywhere where water had got even more than a tiny amount of minerals in it, well, you could flog it as a resort to people, and that's exactly what happened here in Leamington. The locals had known about the waters for years and years, but it was only when the great and the good from elsewhere discovered it that the town started to really grow. And unlike, say, Bath, which is largely Georgian, Leamington's a little bit later. It's Regency. When we say Regency, we mean from the period when King George III was incapacitated and the reins of power were taken by his eldest son as Prince Regent. And Regency tends to differ from Georgian in the fact that we have more casts and wrought iron decoration on balconies, like on these buildings you can see here, and we tended to cover the brick with plaster, a kind of plaster called stucco, so it gives it a more lighter, slightly more dainty feel. This is the Pump Room Gardens. It's the tower of Leamington's very large and mostly Victorian parish church that you can see in the distance, and the bandstand is used as much today as it ever was. You still get all sorts of entertainments taking place here. It's a lovely green lung right in the middle of the town. This is Leamington's main Roman Catholic church. It's a Victorian building. It replaced a slightly earlier one on the other side of the river in the old town, where in fact Louis Napoleon, the future Emperor Napoleon III of France, when he was living in exile in England, he lived for a time in Leamington, and he used to go to worship at the old Catholic church. They moved here. That tower's quite interesting. It used to have a spire on top, but that was damaged in a bombing raid during the Second World War and was never replaced. I always think you don't realise it ought to have a spire until you actually look at the tower. And then once you know that, I've sort of spoilt it for you, haven't I? It looks a little bit empty. It looks like something's missing. This is the old Leamington pump rooms. Until fairly recent times you could come here to take the waters for medicinal purposes. It then had a time when it was all rather empty and forgotten and forlorn. It had an uncertain future, but it's now been turned into the town's museum, art gallery, library and information office. Now, unlike a lot of spa towns, here in Leamington it's actually still possible to take the waters free of charge. Come and have a look at this pump. It's absolutely disgusting. Sorry, I mean, it's really nice and awfully good for you. And this is Leamington's river, either the Leam or the Lem, call it what you will. It's always been prone to flooding. It still does occasionally. In the late 1990s there was a serious flood here, but it has been limited over the last century or so since the borough constructed that weir that you can perhaps see just ahead of us there, together with a rather elegant iron suspension footbridge. The town generated its first electricity on that spot. They had a little, well, big for the time I suppose, turbine that was turned by the power of the water. There's still an electric substation there as a sort of legacy of that to this day. But the Leam is a lovely green slice that runs through the middle of the town, and one part of the Leam, or its banks, have been especially beautifully landscaped, and that's what I thought you might like to have a look at next. These two plaster or stucco covered lodges mark the entrance to somewhere I remember coming to as a child. We used to come here in the 1960s every year for the Leamington lights or illuminations, but these guard the entrance to something called the Jeffson Gardens, which are named after a local physician called Dr. Henry Jeffson, although the gardens themselves were actually a gift from another local man, a man who lived just up the road at Newbolt Common called Edward Wills or Willis. And although it's not right to say the gardens ever became somehow forgotten or neglected, they have in recent years really had the most beautiful restoration. It's a lovely place to come to, right in the middle of town. The fountains that you're about to see over here on the right hand side, they're based loosely on the fountains at Hampton Court Palace on the outskirts of London, and they've really used the water features here very, very well indeed. There's a special area that we're coming to, this silver birch tree that we're approaching, that commemorates the friendship between Royal Leamington Spa and Brühl, which is its Partnerstadt, its twin town in Germany. Brühl lies between Cologne and Bonn, and the gardens themselves include this very special area you can see here, which was put in when they did some restoration a few years ago. Notice how the railings come out like that. That was put as an area so people can come here and feed the ducks and the other waterfowl, and it gets them all to congregate in one place so they don't make too much of a mess. Well, that's the theory anyway. Just beyond the fountain there, you can see the really lovely glass houses. That has a cafe and restaurant. They do private catering there. That obelisk you can see, that commemorates Edward Wills, who presented the gardens to the town, and it's a nice introduction here to the glorious coloured flower beds. Even this early in the year, even in March, it's all something of a riot of colour. It's like that nearly all of the year here. We're really lucky to have this right in the middle of town. Always reminds me about how parks used to be in my childhood. They're not always as well looked after nowadays. There isn't the money for it, but there apparently is in Leamington, and long may it carry on, eh? Now, although that obelisk you've seen commemorates Edward Wills, who gave the land to the town, don't forget it is officially called the Jeffson Gardens, and Dr. Jeffson is himself commemorated in front of this rotunda, this circular building you can see here. Inside there is a statue by a Birmingham sculptor called William Hollins of Dr. Jeffson himself. Let's go and have a closer look. Leamington is a surprisingly multicultural town as well. Lots of people came here after the Second World War from northwestern India, from the Punjab, to work in Ford's foundry here. There's a large Polish community, and during the Second World War a group of Czech partisans were based here, and in 1942 a number of them were parachuted into occupied Czechoslovakia with a mission to assassinate the German commander at Prague. They carried that out, but at great cost to themselves. None of them survived, and after the war this monument to the Czech partisans who'd found their temporary refuge and home here in Leamington, even though they never came back to it, this monument was actually a fountain. It's dry today, but this was erected to their memory with the names of all of them that you can see around the base of that dome. It's funny, you know, I'm very used to talking to groups, and I'm not at all used to talking to a camera, or indeed to myself. It's a good job it's not very busy in Leamington today, else I'd be getting some very strange looks. Now, in contrast to a lot of this light painted Regency architecture, Leamington Spa's town hall is a bit of a sea of Victoriana, all in red brick and dressed Bath, or more likely Cotswold stone. It was built in the 1880s when the focus of the town moved over to this side of the river, and in front of it you'll notice there in the middle of the picture a statue of Queen Victoria. Not that unusual, there are statues of Queen Victoria all over Britain and a few other countries I can think of. But this one isn't in its original position. Well, not quite anyway. You might remember earlier I said that Leamington suffered a bombing raid in the Second World War. Well, that bombing raid didn't just destroy the spire of the Roman Catholic Church, it actually moved Queen Victoria's statue about 1.5 inches, about 5 centimetres, 4 or 5 centimetres from its base. And if I go around the corner here, notice that section there is overhanging. Let's go around the corner and you'll see that it's not quite as it originally was. It was moved on this section here by the force of a bomb. You can imagine how powerful that was.